Well, hello everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am quite excited to be in this conference all the way from Germany. So I will get started by telling you a little bit about myself, who I am, and what I'm doing here today. So my name is Sheila Beladinejad. I have been in software engineering for over 20 years. I have, started my career as a developer, then became an analyst, got into management and consulting. I'm currently the CEO of O Canada Tech, and I'm also the head of partnerships at Women in AI, which is a nonprofit organization supporting women in artificial intelligence, and I'm also the ambassador for that organization in Munich. What I do is, I consult in technology for many years now. I advise C-level executives on best practices, strategies, AI adoption, digital transformation, and so forth. And for the past few years, I have been heavily engaged with technical due diligence projects, working with private equity firms in the process of mergers and acquisitions. Now, I'll tell you a little bit about what a technical due diligence project is, in case you're not familiar with it. So as part of a merger or acquisition, the investors need to perform some technical diligence to make sure that everything is okay. It's just an assessment that is performed, and it involves anything and everything that is software related. So I perform this task on the behalf of the investors, and what I do is, I look at everything from the SDLC methodology to the software architecture, whether it's monolithic, microservices, containerized. I look at the infrastructure, the network, the storage, the capacities, the security, and so forth. So what I looked for is to see if the current system is supporting their business objectives today, and would it scale, and is it set up properly for growth in the future. So that's, and to do all of this, what I do is I interview with the architects, the dev leads, the product leads, the ML engineers, data scientists, all of the C-level executives, and so on. I get down to the code level. I do a walkthrough of the code. I often conduct an open source scan, which is quite important in data science projects, and I'll get a little bit more into that in future slides. And I also help the private equity firms with the post-acquisition plan to, mitigate any risks that wasn't uncovered, and have a solid plan to address those. So I have, after conducting all these technical due diligences, like I said, I've done over 50 in the past couple of years. I noticed that there is a pattern for success. I noticed that, the companies that have done really well and were really successful for all parties involved had certain characteristics. So what I have done is I have summarized those characteristics and would like to share those with you. All 5 of them are equally important, but I do have a favorite, and I will let you know what that is at the end. So first off, the business case. So you need to have a solid business case and know what problem are you trying to solve, and a real world problem that is tied to the return on investment. You need to be asking, is this something that people really need? Are they willing to pay for it? Is there a way to monetize it? Can I measure the success of this idea? When I build an MVP, is this measurable? How do I know that I'm actually meeting the expectation, and so on? You need to be asking the right question. And what is the right question? So let's say, for example, you're building a fraud detection system for a credit card company. And the question you may be, asking yourself, is, well, is this transaction fraudulent or not? And what that will end up with is a, true-false result. And that is a little bit risky because then you could, set yourself up for a lot of false positives. But what if you ask the question, well, are there any, are there any anomalies in the transactions? Does anything look weird? And then when that is triggered, then you can dig deeper and then you will have a better understanding of the problem and, which will result in less false positives. So you need to make sure that you perform, a feasibility study and do some market research and make sure that you are up to date with the needs, because as you know, the market needs changes constantly and it evolves rather quickly. I will give you some ideas as to how to go about creating these business cases. You can start by, if you're just starting to do some AI implementation, you can consider some short-term value and quick ones without compromising your long-term strategy. Something, for example, like projection and forecasting. There are a lot of AI applications out there that do enhancing customer service, maximizing sales, or sharpening cybersecurity, and freeing up workers from mundane tasks. Those are one of the simple things that you can address that will have great benefits. I'm giving you an example of a German retailer called Otto. It's a very old retailer, and what they did was their first AI implementation that was successful. They mastered the forecasting process such that with 90% accuracy, they could predict what they would be selling in the next 30 days, and that resulted in speedy deliveries and great customer service and reducing their returns. So the takeaway of this particular point is that AI initiatives need to be assessed and co-led by both business and technical leads and relate to the overall strategy. So you need to have the business aspect of things in mind before you get into the technical feasibility, and that's something that a lot of us techie guys like to just jump into the technical things, but you need to make sure that you do your diligence in terms of the business needs and the market needs. So next, we get into the technology ecosystem. Now, what do I mean by technology ecosystem, and why am I getting into technology? Weren't we talking about AI? Well, AI is not a standalone. It is not a separate entity. It is part of the software. It sits somewhere. It sits on the infrastructure. So it is part of the architecture. It is not separate from that. So a lot of the best practices that apply to technology also apply to the AI, and of course much more to it than that. So as you all definitely know, data is really important. You need to have a good strategy of approach of, for example, if you need the data in real time, it will be different than if you need it in a batch mode. So you may end up having different strategies for your online mode and your offline mode. Totally different architectures, totally different tools and methodologies and whatnot. So you need to have a good understanding of all of that and define that from the beginning up front, so you don't get into any issues down the road. The Goldilocks principle of data. You can't have too little data. If it's you have 1,000 rows of data, how can you build a model with that? You can't have too much data. If you have too much, then you're cursed with the dimensionality reduction and all of that fun stuff. So you just need the right amount of data to work with and build your models and so forth. You need to have the right type of data. And what do I mean by the right type of data? So I worked on a project where it was for a manufacturing industry, and they wanted to do predictive maintenance. And they told me, oh, we have volumes and volumes of data. We gather data from the sensors on the floor shop all the way up the 4 levels, up to the CRM. We have a lot of data that you can use and help us predict any kind of, incidents, and we can do maintenance, and it'll save us a lot of headache. So after months of investigating and looking at the data, we realized that actually there was no data captured on the floor shop related to incidences whatsoever. So no one ever captured when the incidents occurred, what time did they occur, what was the reason, who looked into it, who restarted the machines. There was absolutely nothing there. So, you can imagine how big of a success that project was. So you need to think about these things up front and have a good idea of what you need and before you get started and waste a lot of time and effort and so on. As far as our architecture goes, of course, again, the best practices of architecture, you need to look at security, scalability, interoperability, and so forth, and be agile and nimble so that you can meet the market expectations. Tools and framework. There are no shortages of tools out there. I'm sure as part of this conference, you've heard about a lot of tools. There's so many fantastic companies out there creating tools and frameworks to make the life of the ML engineer easier so that they can focus on the right things and not be dealing with mundane manual steps and so on. So there are commercial tools, there are open source tools. Explore it, use it, try to automate your workflows as much as you possibly can. So the takeaway here is, build an ecosystem where you can build, deploy, test, and monitor at scale, and use the tools and the frameworks that are available to you so you can be more productive and efficient. Then moving on to methodology. Now, what do I mean by methodology? I mean that, take a scientific approach to your exploration. Create a hypothesis, test it, validate it, apply design thinking principles if it's something that's facing a user. Choose an SDLC methodology and stick with it. So let me tell you a little bit about the SDLC methodology. So I have gone to companies where I've seen they practice semi-agile, semi-waterfall, a little bit of Kanban, a little bit of Scrum, a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And believe me, it does not work. It's not efficient. Just agree on some things and stick with it and go with it. And and a lot of times people think, okay, we want to be agile. We're not going to do a lot of documentation. Believe me, documentation really helps, not just for demonstrating to your investors that you have good documents and you can do knowledge transfer, but also, what if someone who is a key person walks away and all the knowledge is in their head? You need to have something. And that doesn't mean that you need to go and use, expensive tools to create the documentation, but you can draw up the, architecture on a whiteboard, take a picture, store it somewhere that is accessible to everyone on the team. As simple as that. Believe me, I've gone to so many companies where I've seen that they have had absolutely nothing, and they presented me with an architecture document that was 5 years old and not relevant anymore. Be metric oriented, and you can have metrics all along the way. From the time that you create your MVP, there are tools and ways to validate the market requirements, whether it's customer interviews, A/B testing, crowdfunding, and what have you. There are ways to use metrics to see the accuracy of your algorithms. If it's classification, regression, and whatnot, there are a lot of tools, metrics out there for you to use. Use it often, and store it. Store it so that you can compare it store it so that you can demonstrate it. If anybody comes and says, okay, how good is your algorithm? How do you know it's correct? How do you know it's meeting the business requirements? How do you know that you're refreshing it often enough? So, these types of questions, if you have some sort of documentation, you can always go and look back at the historical values and make sure that you're on track. Another part of methodology that I wanted to share with you is responsible AI principles. As you know, nowadays ethics in AI, having data that is unbiased and so on is getting a lot of attention, and for very good reasons. I did a simple search and I realized that there are over 160 organizations around the world currently focused on ethics and AI. A lot of them have, different definitions of what is a responsible AI, but what I found common across all of them is actually something that was defined by Microsoft, and it's very easy and simple to understand, where, there is fairness, inclusiveness, reliability and safety, transparency, privacy, security, accountability, and so forth. I'll give you an example where I think that the industry is moving towards some really good steps in collaboration. It may not necessarily be AI related, but you can see that leaders in the industry are coming together to do good and gain the trust of people who are using the apps. And the example I'm going to give you is just yesterday in Germany, SAP, T-Systems, and the Robert Koch Institute released an app where it is being used for tracking and tracing COVID-19. It is fully transparent, it is open source, and this is a wonderful initiative to demonstrate to people that the leaders in the industry can be trusted. One thing about the methodology I wanted to highlight is I have been recently looking into the decision intelligence. This is actually a term that has been coined by Google and led by Cassie Kozyrkov, where the principle is to augment data science with theory from social science, decision theory, and managerial science. It's a very good methodology to apply to making decisions, whether it's in data science or any other part of the organization, with human resources or what have you. It generally helps people to make better informed decisions using data, of course. So the message here from the methodology is apply best practices every step of the way, know what to measure and how often. Next, we have managed risks. So what do I mean by risks? Every company has risks. It's just good to know what they are. Risks could be something such as dependencies. You could have a dependency on a particular data source, on vendors, on even people. I'll give you an example of a data source. So I was assessing a project where their main data source was Wikipedia. So and they had no other plan B. And I asked the question, well, what will happen if Wikipedia shuts down? And everybody in the room looked at each other and they're like, well, we don't know, we're doomed. Have a plan B. That would be really helpful. Another risk is cost. Have a good handle on your R&D costs. And one thing that frightens investors is that data science is known for people, researchers going down the rabbit hole, chasing something for months on end, and it could be costly. So you need to have a good handle on your cost. You need to have a good handle on knowing when to stop and pivot and do something else. And so try to manage that as much as possible. Nowadays, I see that using cloud solutions is very popular. We have machine learning algorithms available in the cloud from Amazon, Google, IBM, Oracle, Microsoft Azure, and whatnot. Actually, I saw that Dave had a poll just up there, and AWS is quite popular. but also it could become costly if you don't know how to use it right. So you need to really be careful about your cost. AWS also has some cost optimization tools. Look them up and try to use it so that at the end of the year you don't end up with a hefty bill. Compliancy issues also, categorized under risk because, well, again, we talked about the AI ethics. If you don't do things right, where the ethics of it, the diversity of the data is concerned and whatnot, where privacy issues are considered, like the GDPR, like the HIPAA for healthcare and so on, that may end up in devaluing your brand and negative publicity, which you really don't want. Licensing and security issues. Now, open source is widely used in, machine learning, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. A lot of times, investors ask me, well, these people are using a lot of open source. Is that really a good thing? Or I say it absolutely is. You don't want, the team to be reinventing the wheel. You want them to use whatever is out there and be, concentrate on enriching their data, with feature engineering, concentrate on mastering the productionization of the machine learning solutions to production and so on. You don't want them to rebuild algorithms. And if you do want to do that, then that's something that, researchers are really good at and optimizing algorithms and so on, but it's not part of the machine learning engineers and the typical data scientists' jobs to tune algorithms. There are really good ones out there, use them, but the risk of using open source, like contrary to what a lot of people believe, it's not all free. Open source has various, different kinds of licensing agreements in there. If you modify the algorithm, then there could be some issues there. So you really need to be careful on the open source usage. And how can you be careful? Have an open source policy. Communicate that to the team. Make sure that you have a systematic way of controlling that by, having controls in place where you're submitting the code, or, pair programming where you're going to get somebody a peer review. So try to monitor that both systematically and process-wise. There are tools out there that can help you track the use of your open source and also scan to see what vulnerabilities, are flagged. And a lot of the open source actually flag not only the licensing issues, but there are a lot of loopholes in the security aspect of things. So you need to know, you need to be on top of the patches that address those issues and whatnot and get a good grip on that. I will give you an example of a company that I did an open source scan, and they had 32 variations of their code base. And in each of their code base, they were using a lot of open source. We ended up with 450 issues related to licensing and security. And as you can imagine, that transaction did not go very well. Know your competitive landscape. Again, that's something that, investors are keen to make sure that you know where the market is heading. You're developing the right things. You know what it is. You're on top of it, and you're developing the right things. If you're a startup, you're an entrepreneur, and you have not had a chance to register your, intellectual property and whatnot, make sure you document your innovation every step of the way so that when the time comes to register it, you have everything and all the evidence that you need to do that. Technical debt. Technical debt is actually a very critical issue that you need to be aware of it. A lot of times I have been to a company and they have been very upfront and straightforward. They say, we know what the issues are. We are fully aware of it. We have this plan. We are going to be refactoring all of our technical debt. This is the plan for it. These are the releases that we have, planned for, and so on. And that makes such a big difference. It shows and demonstrates that you know what the problems are, you have a good plan in place, and you will be addressing it in your roadmap. So I actually came across a paper talking about a hidden ML technical debt, which I You know, it's a really great read. I will share my slides with you so you can go check it out. It talks about in depth on what the machine learning technical depths are. Another, last but not least, is the business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Again, so many companies do not have one. I did a technical due diligence on a company that had 25 million subscribers, and their, you know, business continuity and disaster recovery plan was non-existent. Unfortunately, they did not even have a backup sent anywhere off-site of their data. So think about it. Try to, you know, have a disaster recovery plan from the get-go. It's a lifesaver, even if it's something basic, and but have some plan, have some kind of a backup. So the message here on this slide is proactively manage the risks. Now, last but not least, and this is my favorite part of it, is the people. Now, all of the things that I talked to you about, the technology, the great architecture, managing your risks, knowing the methodologies to apply and whatnot, none of it is good if you don't have the right expertise on the team. I actually give this the most attention when I do the tech DDs, because I think if the people on the team have the capability to do things the right way, that is much more important to me than what I see on a piece of paper. So what are the best practices? Collaboration with research institutes, talking to people from other industries. If you're in the healthcare industry, talk to someone in logistics, see how they do things. You would be surprised. You could learn a thing or two on, from other industries as well. One of the things that I've seen, when it comes to defining the team for data science, a lot of times what I see missing is a domain expert. You need to have a domain expert to help you with the data enrichment process, feature engineering, interacting with the customer, knowing exactly what the customer wants and needs, and defining the appropriate metrics. I'll give you an example, actually, of a tech DD that I did. A couple of guys, graduates from Waterloo, they had a startup, and they had built the perfect team. They had someone who was, this company was in environmental solutions and whatnot, and energy, and they had someone who had a PhD in environmental studies, knew data really well, interfaced with the customer, knew exactly how to define, enrich the data, to do the feature engineering and whatnot, and they had great success, and of course that transaction went through really well. There's another example of where a domain expert, as you know, Blue Dot is a Canadian company which predicted COVID-19 before it was on anybody's radar, was founded by an epidemiologist. So AI is not just about the technical people, all the techies, but it's something way beyond that. As you have noticed, they are people, sociologists, psychologists, physicians, AI ethicists, and so on. So you may not be able to hire all of these people, but know how to engage them, when to engage them, and benefit from their expertise. A data scientist may not know how to handle the situation where you have, for example, gathered a lot of data from your from surveys and whatnot, but what if people lie on these surveys? What if they don't, tell you the truth? What if there's some incentives for them to give you false answers and things like that? A sociologist or a psychologist knows how to deal with those kind of scenarios. So consult with one, and it is really helpful. And last but not least, in the people, have a product owner. And product owner is really important, and that should not be someone who wears many hats. I've seen some companies where, the product owner is also the software engineer, the QA tester, or, does all sorts of other things. You need a dedicated product owner who owns the product from end to end. And believe me, that is a lifesaver. So this is the essence of this slide is just, build the right team, know where to, when to get help, know who to go to, and make sure that there's alignment between the business and the leaders. How can you do that? It's mostly by engagement. If everybody is engaged, then the chances of alignment is, of course, higher. And yeah, so we're almost at the end. I hope I have not run into extra time and so on. But before I, give you a summary, I just wanted to give you a couple of examples of cases that did not go through with the technical diligences. One was a logistics company where they had, this logistics company was over 25 years old. They had to develop their own proprietary programming language. Which was great and efficient 25 years ago, but who wants to go learn it now? And if those 3 people who know this proprietary language walk away, how are they going to survive? How are they going to maintain the code? So if you're not SAP, Microsoft, Google, or AWS, perhaps you should stay away of creating a new programming language or rebuilding something from scratch. Their legacy system was too costly to maintain. They had data all over the place and all these various kinds of databases. Consolidating all of that into one would have been a nightmare. So that was one case. Another case was an accountancy firm. They had chaotic methodology in their SDLC, a mishmash of, this and that and waterfalls and the they were just not efficient enough. They had customized their code in 32 different versions of the code. Imagine an accountancy firm where there's a new tax law that comes into the picture, and every time they need to, go in manually and upgrade 32 versions of the code. So try not to, customize code for your customers and, make it table driven and configurable and so forth. And again, so at the end, I think, we covered all of this, the 5 points business case, have a solid, validated case tied to the good technology ecosystem, be proactive in managing your risks, apply the appropriate methodology for your organization, select the right type of people. And that's pretty much all I had for today. Thank you so much for taking some time to listen to my presentation. I hope I've been helpful. You are more than welcome to reach out to me afterwards if you have any further questions or follow-ups. And if you are a woman in AI and you would like to join us, here's some information of how you can look us up and become a member.
Fantastic, Sheila. I will get started. If you want to go on mute, I will jump in and get started. Let me see if I can get this screen share to work. All right, so Sheila, I'll rely on you in case my screen is not visible at any point of time. I'm focusing squarely on my slides. So in case, because I can't see you right now, in case I'm missing something, just stop me or unmute yourself and jump right in. So I'm going to take the next 7 to 10 minutes to talk to you about one particular project or prototype that we developed at Durham College's AI Hub. And you'll see here that I've fused it with the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation. And there's a very particular reason for that. Let me get into that. That'll be the whole gist of my 7 to 10 minutes. So a little bit about me, not much really to say. I don't have the caliber as Sheila does. I didn't go to school to study IT. I got an IT degree sort of on the streets, for lack of a better word, growing up in Dubai and having to innovate different ways to get access to information. I did go to school for a week to study IT, and then I dropped out. And I chose to go down a different path. But I can assure you that as I lead the AI Hub, as well as the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation, and my previous roles leading products and network teams at Orion, I may know a thing or two. Not as much as Sheila, but a thing or two. Now, looks fancy. I know we've done a great marketing job explaining to you what, or presenting a prototype to you. But let me take you on a little bit of a journey. I want you to take a second to think about real estate. Okay? You heard from Sheila about technical debt. You heard from Sheila about steps that you can take to present your prototype or your product or your idea in AI to a potential investor. I want to scale you down even more. You only have an idea. You have nothing else. You may have a team with equity in your idea, but nothing else. And you want to convince an investor, particularly in this case, I won't be talking about venture capitalists. I'm going to talk about an angel investor. I can get into details about what an angel investor is at a separate session. But you want to convince an angel investor, this is a prototype worth investing in. At Durham College's AI Hub, companies come to us, pitch us ideas, or I pitch them ideas, and if they like it, they invest in it, and we develop the prototypes from them. I'm watering it down. Obi, who's on this chat, knows a lot of it because he's worked with companies like Accountable, Region of Durham, Low Freight Rate, you name it. I want you to focus now on this particular concept here, AI, a cybersecurity platform delivered by AI, and take your mind to what we're selling. Or if you had a pub. So I was talking to you about how you hedge your bets when you're going to present something from a real estate perspective. I'm sure you guys can hear me now, so I'll continue going. You talked about the different aspects of a particular product, of a particular asset. It's no different from the world of AI. It's no different when you're presenting a machine learning or a deep learning based solution. You need to look at three very important things. And this is our experience from this particular prototype. What we did for the client is when they came to us and said, we want to create a solution that can help us proactively assess a network log for a particular kind of threat, I did three things for them. Number one, I started from the ground up and told them what was the ground reality. I allowed them to understand that if the big vision doesn't play out, if, using the real estate example, the whole product doesn't happen or the whole asset doesn't appreciate as you expected it to do, there are other pieces of this asset that you can use. So we started from the ground up and showed them the realities of what we're going to be doing. Not only did we sell them on the idea of, hey, we might be able to develop an algorithm that can proactively detect for malware, ransomware, zero-day attacks, or whatever else have you at the network level, we gave them something else as well, which was a SIEM platform built from scratch. A SIEM platform is a security event incident management solution, which basically told this company that in the event that our algorithm is not cutting it, you still have a customizable proprietary SIEM solution that you can use and layer on to spin off something else. Show them not one, not two, but plenty of different ways in which your particular idea could go. You have a focus for sure to rock it in the world of AI, but you've got other things upon which you're hedging your bets. I always say this when I pitch to investors. It's not just about the return on investment. Start with a little bit of a return on imagination. Imagine what we could do with this, but if we don't get it right, there are other fallback options. I always take the three-step process because when I talk to them about what I'm doing from the ground up, I can then talk to them about what the next level is. I will never go to an investor and say, hey, you know what, I'm a guy that doesn't like to go with the flow. I go with my own flow. I like to be my own flow. Great, but that doesn't necessarily pay the bills. How are you going to layer on the machine learning component? Be very, very realistic about that. You see, when you're pitching an AI solution, or when at least we were doing it as well, one of the things that we did not shy away from is exactly what Sheila spoke about. Is yes, a lot of us tend to get knee deep in the research, chest deep in the research, and we end up, 6 months or 8 months later paying some big salaries, not having reached anywhere. I open up that Pandora's box by looking into that gray area right away. And I tell them specifically, here is what we're going to layer the machine learning solution on. I have never, at least to angel investors, I have never pitched a product or a prototype that is solely driven by AI. I always go on to how am I gathering and collecting the data. The pre-processing and the processing of the data is where a lot of the magic lies. Being able to explain to them what we mean when we say, I see Nupa on this as well, who's one of my colleagues, she always taught me to say this, and I agree with it. If AI is the rocket, data is the fuel. Show them that fuel, show them where it's going to be. Believe you me, take it from Sheila as well when she said AI solutions have psychologists, have sociologists, have all sorts of people in their mix. The key to remember is When somebody sees data and they understand data, then the sky's the limit. Once you get the investor invested in the idea of, look at all of the insights I have or we have, what can I do with these insights? That's when you start getting more buy-in. That's when an investor realizes, I've got an asset here. I've got some data. I can work with this. Go ahead and do your machine learning and AI thing, but now the sky's the limit. You are able to now develop a machine learning model that for now can detect malware and study patterns in near real time. But now you've got your investor gone knee deep in the idea of buying into the idea of, there's so much more that we can do with this. So my 3-step suggestion to you is always remember this. Start from the ground. Imagine it's just barren land and something's coming up on top of it. Break it down into bits and pieces. What can be sold? What can go in different directions? And always remember, what is the IP in this? I detest it when I go into scenarios where companies tell me, we're solving this using AI, but 90% of it is prescriptive. Be absolutely clear and understand and answer the question of, where is the AI? And if no AI, what am I still left with? This is why when we presented this solution to the company that we work with called People and Places, which is a startup, their founder was the CTO of Digicel Dominica, we presented 4 different areas where things would be happening. Number 1, we showed him exactly where our solution could be deployed. This gave him and his partners an opportunity to go and talk to folks at the network level, to go and talk at the client infrastructure level, to go and tell them we're doing something with Durham College. And the key product that they were pushing there was log collection and aggregation. 2 students from this team got hired for one reason. They were now able to develop and code in ElkStack or Kibana. Many of you would have heard of this language, which is used for dashboards, which is used for log aggregation. Key thing here is before we even got the ML algorithm out there, we were already, for lack of a better word, rocking and rolling because the log aggregation that we had done was extremely strong. This presented a skill set in and of itself that various companies were interested in. iSecurity being one, Stratagem being another, Optiv being the third. We had interest from AWS as well, all interested to know how are we using ElkStack and how are we modifying it. We then went a step further to say, how do you even parse and index these logs? You've got all of these data pieces. What's the intelligence with which you parse them and bring them before a SOC analyst? This again tied into the Kibana piece, but more importantly than anything, it showed our investor and the community. Now, not only do we have data, we're able to analyze and report on that data, providing you real-time, proactive alerts. Remember, I haven't even touched the AI piece right now, but 60% into the product, I've got the data on lockdown. Started from the ground up, and now we're here at the presentation there. And then the cherry on the top was the AI piece. This allowed me, while my team worked on the data aggregation, this allowed me to really focus on how am I going to build my algorithms. Now, of course, I'm not going to spill out the secret sauce and tell you exactly how we did it, but today we're at a point where we're using signature-based detection, which basically looks at certain patterns in the network logs, and through something that is peculiar to this particular platform, we're able to provide alerts. Now, the client not only has a database, they not only have a very strong reporting mechanism, they've also got something that they know from an AI perspective is something that they can patent, something that holds some level of IP. Always get the investor to know what your plan B and plan C is without losing your focus. Now we're at a point where we've got a couple of phases that we're going to go into. The client wants to continue the project where we're going to go into creating different agents, intelligence feeds, response ads, and MITRE attacks, which are now really going to take this product to the proverbial next level, which is why I always tell my students, when you're building an AI solution, go back to the basics and remember this. And I say this all the time to them when you're pitching, when you're planning your ideas, etc. You know, they always say you fall 7 times so that you can get up the 8th. Be prepared for that. But more importantly, there will always be challenges. There will always be difficulties. The gem only gets polished because of friction. You and I only learn and grow because of trials, and you should be ready to embrace that. Obi is my student on this chat right now, and he knows I said this during my last lecture in class, that you know what? You got to be prepared to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and there's nothing like when you're preparing an AI solution and pitching it to understand how that uncomfort really feels. You're not selling certainty, you're trading in imagination, and you should break it down to capitalize on that oil, which is the data, and then layer on everything on top of that. That was my 10 minutes. I will come back into the hop-in environment and see if there's anything else.
Well, thank you so much, Ali, for sharing your experience. I really appreciate it. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience. Are there any questions for Ali or myself? Okay, we have a question. Hey, Ali, please talk a bit more about return on imagination.
Yeah, for sure. So the return on imagination piece is relatively straightforward in that I don't always go to the customer, to my investors, or to somebody who's coming in to talk to my team and say, this is how much money you can make on this. What I talk to them is, look at if I got all of these data points for you, then let's work together to see where we want to take this. You have to play on that data piece. I don't trade in saying, this is what I'm going to do if I collect A, B, and C data points. I like to bring those data points, that database, to my clients, to the investors, and then get them to participate in that journey of ideation. Yes, I know where I wanted to go. Remember, Ahmed, I knew I wanted to create an algorithm that would proactively detect specifically for malware. And then I wanted to scale it from there. But I didn't stop there. I made sure that the client was part of the ideation. That's what I mean by return on imagination. That's what I mean by using your investors' brain trust and using the community brain trust to take your prototype forward.
Okay, any other questions? Anything from what I shared? So if you guys don't mind, I will actually like to send you a link to a survey that I've put together. I always appreciate feedback. I know I kind of squeezed in a lot of information there, so feel free to contact me offline if you have any follow-up questions. I'm not quite sure how it works in terms of sharing my slide deck with you. I will ask the organizers how I can do that so that you have those handy if you would like to. Okay.
Sheila, I think you had a question earlier on. If you go up, you'll see that there was a question where somebody asked you, give me a second, I'll put up, what sort of warranties and reps do investors look for that are specific to your tech development?
Warranties.
Yeah, that was a question from Imtiaz.
Well,
I have a couple of things that we've gone through.
Yeah, I wouldn't, yeah, what kind of warranties and reps do investors look for?
I mean, I can tell you what we've done on our side.
Yeah, okay, so warranties, we usually come up, I don't necessarily call it a warranty, we come up with a 90-day post-acquisition plan. So in that plan, we define what if this goes wrong, what if that goes wrong, what if we discover something new, how, a plan of how to address that. We have a plan of all the mitigations that were, highlighted as risk and how we're going to address those post-acquisition. I'm not quite sure if that's what you're, alluding to, but the warranty typically is not on the technical side. It's on the business corporate side of things and the diligences. That's something that the lawyers handle and so forth. And it's not typically that is, handled by the technical team in my experience. So Ali, you may have had a different experience. Perhaps you'd like to share your perspective.
Yeah, ours has always been twofold. Number one is in terms of technical fail safes, we at the very get-go we're in a bit of a different position because we do work from a college perspective. So we always do talk about what the failure rate could be of something. So that's just having open, and from a strategic standpoint, you want to be open and transparent about what can go wrong. The other thing that I will tell you is that from an insurance perspective, is it's always smart, all right, to have some pilots in place or to have some institutions that want to do a pilot with you. There's nothing that I can guarantee you that, if you have certain insurances against your project, and I mean legal-based insurances, what can protect you, or whether that serves as a warranty, it really doesn't. But again, go back to what I told you, right? Is don't just sell them the whole dream of the house. Sell them the bits and pieces of it as well. There are certain things that work well and certain things that don't. And I go back to the real estate example. Yep, the front, the living room is amazing. Other things are amazing. The washrooms need an upgrade. That's fine. You have to use that as your own strategic piece to sort of guide them into, sure, we didn't get to that algorithm that can detect malware, but we got you a SIEM solution as well. That's not to say they asked you to build a bridge and you build a boat. Not quite, but you got to know how to sell it correctly. And you have to have your eyes in multiple things so that you're always coming back with some sort of a warranty to them that you have their best interests in mind. I also like that a couple of folks have always spoken to me about exit strategies and speaking about that at the get-go. I'm not a fan of that. I prefer that you stay focused, that you're in this for the long run. Anybody who's an investor, an avid investor, can read between the lines and know whether you're planning an exit strategy or not. I would say you want to scale yourself correctly when you bring up those conversations.
Okay, well, thank you, Ali. Are there any further questions for either one of us? Going once, going twice. So if you all got the link to the survey that I shared a little bit further up, the type form, I would just appreciate some feedback. I always look forward to, making sure that I have met the expectations and also how to improve on things, or what topics that people like to learn more about, and improve my talk for future sessions and so on. So, well, thank you everyone for attending. If there are no further questions, then see you later.
See ya.